Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us on the latest of our webcasts. We're looking at addressing heightened business risks around user access, and we are 4 months into isolation now with COVID, and I know some of you are less isolated, but it's hit us all. So it's kind of 4 months is a long time, and we've observed, and our clients and business partners have observed some of these changes which we want to share with you. So welcome. My name is Dan French. I am founder and CEO at Consider Solutions. I know many of you, so welcome to you all. I know there's folks on this from Europe, North America, and Asia, so I know for some of you it's an unpleasant time, so appreciate you joining us. I'm very pleased to be joined by Hans van Ness, who's our Chief Operating Officer and also leads the practices around risk, control, and compliance. So welcome, Hans.
Thanks, Dan.
So we're going to be talking to you for the next 45 minutes. In fact, we're going to be talking to you for 40 minutes, and we've got a little bit of time for questions. Those of you who don't consider, just to understand our perspective, it's just to give you a sense of the direction we move in around these things. We kind of focus with the work we do on this aspiration to world-class finance, world-class operations, which broadly supports these objectives on the left-hand side. Improving business results, reducing cost of finance, optimizing cash flow, and having better risk management. And on the right-hand side is kind of the way in which we get there, from financial control and compliance activities, broader risk management, enterprise risk management activities, and process optimization and process transformation. And I think there's an element of all of these in the discussion today. We're very lucky, fortunate to be supported and encouraged by clients around the world. These are some of them. Many of you are on the call today. And I know you guys challenge us a lot in terms of coming up with new ways to respond to changing challenges, and also use simulators to come up with webcasts like this. So thank you all too. So agenda today, I'm going to talk a little bit about why the risk associated with user access is on the rise, and specifically the financial risk associated with user access, and why that might be as a result of COVID. We're going to talk about the fact this domain, this particular area of risk management, has been a problem for a long time. And I want to talk about why that is, because only by understanding that can we really address it properly. We're going to talk to, more importantly, Hans is going to talk through this idea of a pragmatist journey to utopia, which might sound like a complex idea, but it's how do you get to where you really want to be without a kind of massively complex, expensive and time-consuming and ultimately fatally challenging approach. And then we're going to talk about some thoughts for the road and some practical approaches that you might want to take to address these issues. And we have a Q&A. So please, as we go through, ask your questions to the panel on the GoToWebinar interface. And we'll endeavour to answer them at the end. If we don't have time to answer them all, we'll answer them by email. But the more questions you answer, the more it informs the debate for everybody, and it makes it a kind of a collaborative exercise. So please do that. That's great. So if COVID has taught us anything, it's taught us a few things, but business is about the balance of risk and performance, the balance of threat and opportunity. So managing risk can help us in our performance, but as we create new opportunities, we also create new threats. And I think we've all seen that. And this is true at all times, but it's just become very, very apparent in the past 4 months. And I love this, this kind of metaphor, sailing across an ocean. The wind isn't always in the right direction. You know, the ocean isn't always doing what you want it to do, but we have to balance the threat and opportunity to get where we want to be in the safest and fastest way. And I'm not even a sailor, but that's to me that's an important analogy. So before we get stuck in, I do want to ask you a few questions. There's going to be 5 polls. They're very simple as we go through this. This one is really simple. Is how would you describe yourself? And we only have a choice of 5, so that's why there's only 5 there. So would you say you're primarily a financial control, internal control person? Would you say you're primarily information security, CISO, IT compliance? Would you say you're primarily, number 3, ERP applications, broader IS, 4, audit, or 5, other, some other business function? It's just how you describe yourself. This is all anonymous, but it just helps you all and us all kind of gauge the audience and who you're amongst, so you can get a sense of when you see some of the impact of the other polls, what that means. So should be very simple. If you wouldn't mind giving it a go now, put your 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Pretty self-evident. If you could do that, I'd appreciate it. So are you 1, financial control, internal control, 2, information security in that domain, 3, primarily a broader IS role, information systems, IT role, 4, audit, or 5 other. Hopefully this is easy, because if this one's hard, the other one's going to be very hard. So let's have a look at the results. So what do we have here? So that's interesting. So we have 40%, no, 49%, nearly half of you in audit. We have about 35% of you in financial controls, internal controls, and very small in the other groups, which is fine, which is kind of, so I think we're all in the right place. That's great. Thank you for that. So so most people here are in an audit or controls, risk and controls environment. So let's look a little bit about risk. Now, user access risk isn't just about financial risk. There's a lot of impact of poorly managed user access, and it addresses lots of things from intellectual property to fraud, lots of other things. But and this is just kind of an assertion, really, that one of the biggest risks to integrity of financial information is if you have inappropriate access or unauthorized, or access has been authorized without thought, that can lead to unauthorized activities, financial activities, and that's why. Yeah, not only can that result in theft, fraud, waste, and error, but can also affect the accuracy of your financial statements. And it's that last point is the reason primarily that auditors test your access controls, the user access controls, its ability to affect your financial statements. Because as you know, you can get an awful lot done in today's systems. So let's talk a little bit about some examples. Now, these are matters of public record. In fact, some of them, well, this one's a matter of public record because it's Columbia Sportswear. Some of the others we've protected the innocent. But here's, a case. These things happen all the time. Somebody left this company to join a supplier, one of their suppliers. He set up 2 spurious user accounts, let him do some stuff, and over a period of a year and a half, he used these numerous times to help his new employer get business that they might not others have had. Have an unfair advantage, and when it was found, it had caused quite a lot of damage. And the key point here is, pretty obviously, there was no attention on the immediate shutdown of accounts, user accounts for people who leave the company, and insufficient attention to the specifically privileged accounts. But the fundamental thing is, nobody really paid much attention to it, and they assumed it wasn't an issue. Here's one we protected the innocent, but we know this one pretty well. We saw some financial issues in terms of a lot of damaged equipment and a lot of repeat internal orders for customers for industrial equipment. And it turned out that the service engineer, one particular service engineer, because it seemed to happen in a particular area of the business, had access to the customer portal as well as his customer service applications. And this character had developed quite a successful business in taking high-value industrial components and selling them on eBay. So all of these broken elements of equipment weren't broken at all. He was selling them. And again, insufficient attention to who's got access to what systems. Do they need it or not? And who is behind the user ID? I mean, pretty obvious stuff, but you can see the impact of this stuff. This caused a lot of brand damage and obviously some financial impact as well. And here's a more classic financial fraud, and this is far too common to mention, but this particular example is a real company, but I don't even want to mention it. Particular regional financial controller, quite a lot of autonomy, quite a lot of ability to get stuff done, but they were smart enough to try and to use the user ID of somebody who had left the company to act as the counterbalance on segregation of duties. So these things were happening. It all looked balanced and approved. But the controller wasn't subject to any oversight. There was no, again, not enough focus on the levers. When people leave, you don't want these user accounts hanging about for somebody else to use. And again, who's behind the user ID? Now, there's many, many, many ones of these. So I think what's interesting here is look at these top 10 statistics, and they're concerning to say the least. So the fact that every year 34% of businesses worldwide get are actually affected by insider threats. That surprised me it's that high. And insiders are responsible for 30% of all data breaches. And again, we went through a period a few years ago thinking it was all about cyber threats and malicious people outside our organizations, and that does happen, but often the mechanism is actually insiders. Lots of other good points. I think the privileged users, point 4, 55% of people are saying privileged users are the greatest insider threat, which is why auditors are spending a lot of time on that. And you can read the rest for yourself, but point 10 takes the average business nearly a year to resolve a breach, identify and resolve it, and that's elapsed time. But think about the effort that goes into it. Whenever this happens, it's an army of people, everyone has to get involved, it's a fire drill, and it diverts people from the real business. So those are some examples. You probably know some even better ones yourselves, but one of the things that interested me, even just a year ago, before COVID, that I was noticing that more and more big companies were getting attention from their auditors on user access, more than they had been for a long time. And most of these were Sarbanes-Oxley related, but not solely. So I think Sarbanes-Oxley gets a lot of bad press, but actually it's across the world, and big companies who are not subject to Sarbanes-Oxley. It's just this focus from global best practice from the auditors. Now, the PCAOB, which is the public body that oversees the audit firms, this is a Big Four partner gave us this comment, and the PCAOB have realised that a lot of misstatements have been traced back to the fact that user access has been getting out of control. So they've pushed hard on the audit firms and sort of given them a black mark on some of their audits. So now the audit firms are saying, right, we're going to get really focused now on getting these audit issues, making sure that we're focused on the clients and user access. So that's worth bearing in mind. So in the world of, certainly in the world of Sarbanes-Oxley, but to see the UK is implementing its own more tighter version. So UK public companies are going to suffer from the same control mechanisms, oversight mechanism, but across Europe, Asia, the Americas, this is more common. So this idea of the thing that we're all concerned about is nobody wants to be in the top right-hand quadrant, this idea of a material weakness or a significant deficiency. These are things the auditors call out, they put in a management letter, and it's a matter of public record, and it affects the share price, it affects all sorts of stuff. So, and user access risk is usually not at the top, the very top right, but it's definitely in a significant deficiency world, and it's also the most common form of management comment. And of course, with COVID, the past 4 months have had some big changes in how we behave. So we've had staff layoffs and furloughs. We know all about that. We've had the freedom of business units to get on. We need to get stuff done. So we've had to relax how our processes and policies, who's doing what, where. So people have aggregated rights, but more times than not, 2 people are doing 1 job now. There's less oversight. And there's even this issue about people working from home. Some people are kind of sort of lured into the idea of using their access to systems to help them in some kind of independent venture, in the fear they might be losing their job anyway. So they're trying to use company systems to help them out, to help them in an independent venture. So these are some of the things that are making a big impact right now. And you add to that this whole organizational reality of how individuals work within a big business. The whole idea of joiners, movers, leavers, and the accumulated access. So the idea of joining, promotion, job rotating, delegated authority, all these things. And that's a classic case, and people have kind of understood that for a long time. But when you look at the COVID accelerator, these things are happening at the same time, they happen concurrently, with less oversight, and with situations where we just don't have the people to cover the multiple ways of solving these problems. So, the business are saying, we've got staff furloughed, we've lost staff, we're just having to do more with less. There's people doing 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. So this is where some of this heightened issue is coming from. So inappropriate and unauthorized user access has a big impact. It impacts the fact that we can have unauthorized financial transactions going through, which has a massive impact, which is why the auditors are so concerned. And the biggest issue is this one on the right, financial statement error. If you're making those unauthorized access and unauthorized transactions at the kind of at the financial close level or at the journal entry level, you can have, you can make some big journal contributions to have a significant statement error on your accounts, which obviously, that's the worst of all worlds. But all of the fraud issues, which of course the auditors don't look at quite so much, and some argue they shouldn't be looking at it. We've got the theft of intellectual property and personal data, through to sort of technology related issues. I mean, you've obviously got brand damage, which is a big issue, which is related to theft of IP, business disruptions, and then kind of top here, a lot of things to do with more minor things, but they still cost money. So unnecessary fees for systems where you don't actually have real people using them. So these are the kind of the things we're dealing with. So second poll for you, again, it's anonymous. Is user access perceived as a risk in your organization? 1, yes, it's a high risk with ongoing management attention. 2, yes, it's a risk, it's got some management attention. 3, only as a result of our past 4 months COVID experiences. 4, not really, occasionally it comes up with audit, but we get through that. Or 5, I don't know. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, be interested in your feedback. So this is just anonymous, your view, you might not know in detail, what's your sense in your business? So can you have a go at that, please? Should only take you 10 seconds. Which one of those? You can only choose one of 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Got to wait for you to choose your option, and then as soon as enough of you have done that, then we will have a look at the results. So is it 1? Yes, high risk. Everyone's talking about it. 2, it's a risk, so some attention, comes up occasionally. 3, it's only really become an issue with COVID. 4, not really, or only occasionally. And 1, I don't know. Let's have a look at the results, please. So high risk, 50%, so it's high risk with ongoing management attention. And that's interesting. Nobody has, so nobody here has had a, I guess most people have had a COVID experience, has already had a recognition as a high risk. And then 38% of you, yes, it's got some. So, okay, you're all in the top 2 pretty much. That's very, very interesting. So thank you for that. Right, now, before I hand over to Hans, I will remind you, please ask questions as we go through. So when something crosses your mind, even if it's something I've said as part of that fairly brief introduction, make a question now, record it, because you'll forget it later. And as Hans talks, he's got some great insights to share. Get the questions down and let's deal with them. So very pleased to hand over to Hans van Ness. I'll say he's Chief Operating Officer. He leads our practices in risk management, control and compliance. And he's going to deal with 2 things, the 5 big reasons that this is such a problematic domain. And he's also going to take us through the Pragmatist's journey to Utopia. So over to you, Hans.
Thanks, Dan, and welcome you all. User access risks has many aspects. It might differ a bit per organization, which aspect is more important or less important, but the aspects that we have gained from our research are widely spread to most organizations. Interesting enough, most of those aspects are not technical, contrary to popular belief by some groups. We have tried to categorize them into this notion of 5 big reasons, and I think that some of them will immediately draw your attention saying, yes, we've seen that, and hopefully some of them will give you some thought. The first aspect is scope. Too often, user access is around the center of your business process, or even the end of the business process, there where the big ERPs reside. But essentially, user access control is an end-to-end process element. Your scope should address that. And it should also involve all business elements in that scope, maybe even external elements. If you have supply chain people from outside of your organization interact with your processes. And the scope also means that you have to cover anything from setting up an access policy to making sure that the actual access is governed and controlled is the first important element. The second element, well, you know all this picture, the 3 lines of defense. This is covering all 3 lines of defense, not just the second line, not just an IT thing to zoom in on the second line. All 3 lines have their role and involvement, and of course also an opinion on user access matters. They have to play, all have to play their role, otherwise you get stovepipe solutions, and that is a waste of time, space, and money. The third big element is impact. Many of you will also recognize this picture about internal controls over financial reporting, whereby user access is a very important pillar for ICFR. It's not always defined correctly by everybody that is involved with that. Many people see it as a IT general control, indicated also with the access controls bullet to the left. But that is only true from a provisioning point. From a authorization point, it is really a business control and should cover, again, the whole business process and all supporting applications. The fourth big reason is growing complexity in application landscape. We call it the hub and spoke reality, where you have a central application, your big ERP, just an example, your S/4HANA, but you have multiple technologies, multiple applications, and multiple platforms around that. And you have to deal with segregation of duty not only within those clouds or circles, but you have to deal with cross application, SOD, and even sensitive access considerations. And because all our users are taking part in this application landscape, we need to understand that a single entity, being it a person or a robot, can have multiple identities within this landscape. And that creates, of course, additional access risks. And the fifth misconception is the element of the misconceptions. There are many misconceptions around user access. I've touched a few already, but we mentioned 4 here, which are, we think, extremely relevant. The first is we are managing segregation of duty already, so why should we bother? Well, the access is given, but is the access also relevant? Those are 2 completely different things. And history will build up, as Dan showed in his Nautilus, levels of access that might or might not be relevant anymore. So that is something you have to look upon. And also, if you only manage your core ERP, your satellite systems might give you a backdoor. For instance, if you think about a purchasing to pay process, where you have a P2P suite for your purchase order, logging and approval, and you have where the POs might be also stored, or at least will lead to financial activities. So if the same person, the same entity has access to both elements, that could be a potential cause of fraud. The second misconception is, well, we have no material weaknesses. Well, we can tell you from our research, in many companies, in many industries, up to 20% of current user access is outdated. Sometimes slightly less, sometimes slightly more, but this 20% is a good rule of thumb to keep in mind if you never looked at risk awareness is very important for the business. It's not the business should be aware that they have user access risks in their organizations, and that in the end they are responsible to agree if acceptable or not. Technology. There is always new technology coming. The next big thing, the halo effect. Sometimes it seems that technology, but we shouldn't forget that it's first and foremost a process issue that we are addressing with many non-technical elements. New technology might help a bit, but also might confuse people. Many elements like IAMs, IAGs, PAMs are good pieces of technology, but mostly lack the granularity for an effective user access on the segregation of duty level that you're looking for. And last but not least, well, everything is changing due to digital transformation. So why should we do it? Well, I think digital transformation leads to more uncontrolled user access risks across the landscape. If you think about RPA or IoT, it means that robots, non-natural persons, are getting access to your systems, sometimes via very weird and outdated technology. That's point one, and you don't know who is behind it. Is it indeed the robot, or is it somebody, a person, manipulating the robot? And what to think about giving power users access for analytical purposes directly to large databases without security of an intermediate transaction layer. So digital transformation itself raises the user access risks.
Okay, thanks, Hans. So we've got one more question for you all. It's again, it's anonymous. We're talking about user access risk, the overall risk associated with user access. So who owns it in your organization? One, is the ownership across all three lines of defense, as Hans indicated, level 1, level 2, level 3. So it's operational management in the business is level 1. Level 2 is all the people that define and monitor and manage that control environment. And 3 is audit. Is it 2, internal audit specifically? Is it 3, financial control, internal control, your SOX program? 4, is it an IT unit? Or 5, you don't know? Pretty straightforward. Who do you think owns user access risk in your organization? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? So distributed ownership for different elements across 3 lines is 1. 2 is internal audit. 3 is financial control, the controls function, the compliance function, SOX program. 4 is IT, 5 is I don't know. Let's have a look at the results. So 37% are all 3 lines of defense, and if that's well distributed, that's great. 31% is IT, and I think, as Hans has indicated, that's going to be a challenge because it's not these risks are not IT specific; they're business risks. And the third one is 20% in financial controls, internal controls. That's interesting. 1 in 5. Okay, well, that's very that's thought-provoking. So thank you. Back to you, Hans.
Thank you, Dan. A Pragmatist journey to Utopia. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting title that we invented here, but it is to illustrate that we know there is no appetite for massive projects in this area, COVID or not. Too many big projects have been around that took years, took a lot of money, and didn't bring the value that we were looking for. The second thing is, if you want to make a change, you have to make sure that you create an easy way to start. And to make it attractive for your management and to get sponsorship for it, you have to make sure that your investment is as low as possible. Therefore, we suggest to embark on this journey to Utopia, and you have to begin with the beginning, and that is a simple: where are you today? We are using the journeys for this. So first of all, you have to define your as-is situation, your as-is journey, and you have to look upon it again end-to-end business-wise. So from any policies that you might have created or not, to any attestation or monitoring that you are doing. And you should be honest there, and you should focus on gaps. If policies are really adopted or just circumvented, what are the real risks behind your as-is situation? And also map on these the material weaknesses or deficiencies that were pointed out to you, and make sure that you make clear where they fit, be addressed to resolve the risks. So process, resources, and experience are important to map out. And of course, if you have defined your as-is and you agreed on that with all the stakeholders, you have to define your to-be journey. Essentially, this is about setting the ambition. What changes do you want to make? What risks do you want to address? But in a very pragmatic way. So reuse what works. Don't throw away everything that already works, and also be realistic in what is doable in a short period and with a relatively low investment. And of course, you have to decide if you how many steps you need in your journey, intermediate destinations you need, or in other words, how many iterations do you need to get to that utopia. As a vehicle for that, we use the element of a user access review. We really have found out that this is a reality hack that gives you a fast opportunity as the second line to make sure that you prepare information for the first lines so that they can take control of the execution, of the ownership, and the correctness of the given access. You should focus on finding out the biggest risks there. Biggest risks are not defined as something that theoretically can happen, but it should be based on facts. So a user access review should get you the facts to make sure that you know how big your risk is, and also to define the urgency of the need to do something about it. It is trying to bypass any big technology needs also. It can be used relatively independent in what you have, or even can reuse some of the tools that you're using today. To make progress fast, you have to focus on on three elements: simplification, enforcement, and automation. The focus is to get something that is accepted by your organization, and something that gives the actionability to the people in the organization who have to take action. Simplify, make clarity on the why and the what, enforce based on effectiveness, and automate everything that is not essential in the sense that it doesn't require human involvement. So make sure that you automate preparation and follow-on, and leave the human interaction in the middle as visible as possible. If you are undergoing this journey, there are some realities that you will stumble upon. You will be surprised when you think about this more, how difficult it is to find a single source of the truth in your applications and in your systems, that you will find multiple opinions, who owns what. And the polls are indications of that sometimes this, in your organization, this could mean substantial discussions. You have to go through this, but you have to go through this again in a pragmatic way. For a first iteration, you might that the single source of the truth is a chosen source. Only in future iterations you can make sure that multiple sources are combined. It is more important from a pragmatic point of view to start than make sure that you have 100% solution in the first iteration. Yes, in the beginning it is a small project, but you should set it up straight away for business as usual. And you should measure the adoption of it, of your project, and then your business as usual, the outcomes, and don't forget you should communicate during the journey. Open door, but communication is often neglected in this element. Enhance your maturity over time. You can't do it all at once, so you have to improve your processes, maybe enlarge your scope, and give more value to the process. And yes, it interacts also with other get clean and stay clean activities you might do in a GRC arena. Okay, this was a very quick, brief overview of this Pragmatist journey to Utopia. So what did we achieve? Well, we drawn a roadmap from as is to be situation. During the process, we focused on facts. So we confirmed the current authorization of users and what has to be done about that. And we did it without executing a big, massive project. And as a vehicle for our journey, we use actionable user access reviews. And from the travel notes, we made sure that all 3 lines of got more than a postcard from our journey, but got really some good souvenirs that they could use for their own activities.
Thank you, Hans. That was a great talk through not just the 5 big impediments, but also this way of this journey through Utopia. It seems that Utopias might even be accessible by car, which is good to know. So thanks, Hans. I'm sure you got questions on that. There were some important topics there, so keep asking the questions through the interface. That's important. So ask those, and while you're doing that, I've got I think it's a final question for you. How do you address user access reviews today? So Hans talked about user access review as kind of not just an audit requirement, but a reality hack to address a lot of the other issues of joiners, movers, leavers in a simple and rapid way. So one is we don't have that concept of user access reviews. 2, we occasionally do user access reviews when asked to. 3, we have periodic reviews mainly as an IT activity. 4, we do have periodic reviews embedded in business operations. And 5, I don't know. So again, it's anonymous. It's just to get a sense of where everyone sits on this. So 1 is we don't even have a concept of user access review. 2, we occasionally review users when asked to. 3, we have periodic reviews mainly as an IT activity. 4, we have periodic reviews embedded across the business. And 5, I don't know. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we can get to some more interesting stuff. So let's have a look at what you think. So where's the big number? Right, so nearly half of you do have a periodic reviews mainly as an IT activity, and just below that we have periodic reviews embedded in business operations, so that's good. Okay, thank you everybody, that's good news. So let's move forward. So thoughts for the road. We're on this, we've talked about the road to Nirvana or Utopia. And this road, of course, we're all at home mostly, I think. But things you can action today. You can do a few things today. You can take this, assess this as-is process, and Hans shared a template and mechanism for that. Look at that as-is process for user access. 2, you can benchmark the one-time user access audit for core applications and identify the scope of your threat level, the scope of the risk, and then have a plan to address the issues you really have, not the issues you might have. And then 3 is how you might turn that as a recurring process. So those 3 things you can do today. Things that we could do with you or for you is we could do a one-time user access audit for you. Basically, give you execute a standard user access review process, provide access for your reviewers on current status, prepare a summary and walk through on analysis results, give you some follow-up ideas, and that gives you a very quick assessment of where you stand on the benchmark of exposure. It's a very small fixed price, and COVID-19 proof means nobody turns up on your premises, which is pretty standard, I guess, right now, because nobody's going anywhere. But also, the third thing you can do, which are things to really think through and work through, is the 5 impediments that Hans talked through. They're real, genuine issues. The one about scope, the end-to-end process, how do we deal with this end-to-end, the stakeholders, first, second, third line of defense, how do they interoperate, what are their real responsibilities? A lot of organizations are still unclear what the difference between level 1 and level 2 and level 3 is. The impact, the business impact of user access, does everybody understand it? Do the executives understand it? Do operation management understand it? Complexity, particularly around the new technology architectures, and those misconceptions, which are basically about our ability to understand and assess risk as it exists. So keep asking your questions, because that's what we talked through. I hope you found that useful. We're going to now come to some of your questions. So keep asking now. If you're still thinking your question, you can send a question by email now to either myself or Hans. But we've got a selection here, so we've got a few minutes to be able to go through some of these. So some good stuff here. What we got there? Okay. Okay. So that's quick. So how long does it take to do a one-time user access review for a company? Hans, do you want to talk about
that? Yeah, good question. Well, of course, it will vary a bit per organization. If we would set it up for you from the moment we get the required data, it will take about a week just to set it up, do the analysis, make it available for your organizations. Typically, what we will do is to give your attesters, your approvers, remote access to the analysis, and they can work for it for, let's say, a week or two, and then we provide you with the resulting reports. So the core is doable in 4 weeks. Of course, there is a before and after. Per organization, it might differ how long it takes to get the data for this, and of course, the outcome might be that you have to address some changes. That will be the pace of the individual organization. That's not something that I can comment upon.
Okay, but it sounds like a short, sharp activity. Okay, thanks, Hans. Yep. Another one here, interesting about processes. So, isn't the answer to ensure HR processes work in a timely manner? Now, that is a good question, and I'll take a stab at that. I think HR processes in most organizations can be improved, and historically and even today, they're not really end-to-end, so that needs to be improved. But one of the big challenges with HR processes is they tend to deal with permanent employees, permanent staff, and subcontract staff, consultancy staff, temporary staff, service provider staff, your business process outsourcing staff, your suppliers and customers have access to your systems. Usually that's nothing to do with HR. So, and the way we're using technology today is quite often 50% of the usage is people who are not really directly known to HR. So that's the first issue. And addressing the HR processes tends to ignore the fact you have a lot of temporary or non-employed people who have access to your systems for good reason. So you need a mechanism to deal with that. Some organizations have said HR will deal with that whole end-to-end process for all people, which is a big ask. I have to say not many people have done that, but some are doing it. And others are saying, well, HR own the employee cycle, but the temporary staff cycle has to be owned by a business line, which is where it gets complicated. And I think at the second level, in terms of user access, whilst HR might know that someone is being employed for a particular job and they're being promoted or they're being moved to another location, HR in most organizations is not aware to the level of detail about what it is people are going to need to do their job and what systems will they need to do their job. So there's a couple of issues. So it's a really good question, but there's 2 or 3 dimensions to that. Is one, don't really expect HR to own the problem because it's not possible. 2 is you've got to break it into 2 parts, and you've then got to work out what is reasonable for HR to know, and therefore it comes back to first line of defense. Operational managers have a massive responsibility in this, and the job is to give them the tools of the job to make that work. So I think that's a great question. Thanks. Here's another question. Actually, several people have asked this in a different way. So it's not enough to review. You need to remove access. How do you do this without an IDM system, identity management system? Hans, do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, of course, in a business as usual implementation, removing the access automatically as a result of a user access review is certainly something you should strive for. If you don't automate that, you give people jobs that can be done by a computer, which can be done quicker and more fail-safe than handing it over to a technical person to get this provisioning or deprovisioning done. So yeah, an identity management solution of whatever sort is an option. So you can give that a signal from the UAR. So assuming that IDM solution can manage all the required identities and access rights for all applications and office suites and whatever, you can do that if that IDM is in place. But if you don't have it, or your IDM is not covering that wide scope, the UAR implementation itself can trigger multiple deprovisioning, well, let's call it commands, to whatever applications and platforms that should be provisioned, deprovisioned, or reprovisioned. So in that sense, if you don't have the appetite for a big IDM, combining the UAR with an adequate access request and approval system with automated provisioning could be a pragmatic alternative.
Okay, thanks, Hans. That's so it sounds like you can use IDM systems, but you don't need them. So, okay, thank you for that. Our 45 minutes is up, so I want to thank you all for your time. I do want to apologise. We had a little bit of problem with audio through that, so apologies if you didn't get all of the words, but I think you will be able to get access to the materials. People have asked about that, and we will be sending out a synopsis of this. So, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening, depending where it is, where you are, and thanks for attending. Speak soon.